Today is the gospel reading that is the bane of all Orthodox priests as they stumble through all of the Old Testament names. All right? And the question is, why do that to the priest? Why did Matthew do that? All right? So he had a particular reason. So before we talk about the reason, think about when you were young. And those of you that are young, wait, I'll get to you. All right? But when we were young, there was a particular way that we talked. And there was a particular slang that we used. And there were particular customs that we had. Some of them good, some of them not so good. But those were things that we remember from our generation. It was how we spoke and communicated to one another. And when we heard those words and we saw those places, they invoked in us a memory. And then we grew up and we had kids, and they now speak their own language and they have their own customs. So when I was a teenager, I thought that my parents were like the oldest people in the world. And I had no idea the jokes that they laughed at, the things that they wanted to do. I thought all of that was super lame. And then I grow up, and now I go out with younger people, and I am the one who is now lame, because I use phrases like, for those of us who are in that zone, keep on trucking, right? Remember that? All right. And far out, groovy. Okay, that's a little bit older. All right. And nobody in the world is using that. The only slang word that survives time is cool. Cool is the only one that survives. All right. But for the most part, what they are talking about is not what I understand. Whether it's culture, music, slang, those are not from my generation. Neither was what my parents did and their grandparents did from their generation. So, in order to be able to communicate to each generation properly, to invoke the proper idea, we need to speak their language. And this is what we have in the gospel today. The first part of this gospel speaks of what? It speaks of the generations of the prophets and the kings of the Old Testament. Because what the Jews were looking for was the Messiah that was going to come and free them from the oppression of the Romans, just as Moses was prophesied that he would save them from the Egyptians. So what they're going to recognize is a lineage that is presented to them. And they hear these names and they know these names. They've grown up with these names. And these are the powerful names. David, Solomon, Manasseh. Those are names that invoke a feeling that, yes, this Jesus who is from that line is the Messiah. And then Matthew stops that and begins with what? He now begins the language of those who are the Gentiles, who have no idea what the Messiah is supposed to look like. They're not Jewish. They're not looking for that. So what do they hear then? For themselves, now the birth of Jesus took place in this way, and it takes them through now what was prophesied by some of the holy prophets, and so there would still evoke a memory there, okay? But now what Matthew does, speaking to the Gentiles, is says, she shall bear a son, and he will save the people from their sins. And now the Gentiles understand that. Okay, now I see who Jesus is. The names of the Old Testament don't mean anything to me. That's not the language that I speak. But this is the language. We want to know who is this Jesus. Not what his lineage is, but who he is. And so that's what Matthew does in this wonderful and sometimes difficult to pronounce gospel, is that he is speaking to two distinct audiences. The Jews who were anticipating a specific Messiah with a specific lineage, and then to those others, the Gentiles, who were looking to understand who this Jesus is and what will he do for us.